Welcome to Individual Support Plan Guide Training, Module 5, Missouri Quality Outcome Life Domain Areas, Safety and Security, Behavioral Risk and Prevention, Individual Rights and Due Process. The intent of this section is to evaluate if the person has experienced or is likely to experience the need for services or supports to address potential safety situations, to develop prevention strategies, and to implement planned, least restrictive, and positive solutions to safety concerns. There are specific questions that should be asked to understand safety and security risks so that informed planning can occur. These assessment tools are either included in or referenced in the ISP Guide, Safety and Security Exploratory Questions, can be used to frame this discussion. As is the case for everyone regardless of ability, there is a need to plan and prepare for natural or man-made disasters. The challenges faced by individuals with disabilities, though, may mean that additional planning is needed. The booklet, Preparing for Disaster for People with Disabilities and Other Special Needs, can help you get started. Other tools that could be useful in emergency planning are Preparing Makes Sense for People with Disabilities and Special Needs, which helps to identify personal needs and prepare a plan, and the Red Cross Types of Emergency tool, which provides more detailed information regarding types of risks and planning needs. Again, these tools are included or referenced in the ISP Guide. There are several pieces of safety information that should be discussed during the development of the ISP. These include those personal outcomes related to safety that were discovered during the assessment process, the support needed to address dangers in the home, mobility in home and community, crime risk, and unusual levels of supervision. Again, the tool Preparing for Disasters for People with Disabilities or Other Special Needs can provide relevant information on this topic. Behavioral risks are the results of skill deficits, often in communication, or learned responses that prevent the person from fully participating in community life. In the past, undue restrictions or emergency services such as police interventions and hospitalizations have been used to address these risks. HCBS rule requires that the least restrictive intervention be used. The term least restrictive refers to an environment and supports that are least different from that of typical individuals while still allowing the individual to learn, function, and be safe. Limiting access to activities that would typically not be limited for other citizens would be considered restrictive. The behavioral risk exploratory questions will help the team to identify what kinds of problems have been occurring and to consider how to help the person. If problems are identified, the Assessment of Common Risk Factors tool can help plan for high-risk situations. The Crisis Safety Plan should describe prevention strategies for the use of the individual and the support team and plan how to help the person through any crisis situation safely. The plan is then written down for reference by the support person and the individual and should be reviewed and changed frequently. If the problems occur more frequently than once or twice in a year, have significant impact on the person's life. For example, they result in hospitalization, police involvement, injury, or require several adjustments in medication to address, the team should strongly consider the need for professional behavioral services. If a person is likely to experience behavioral risk, the team must at least complete a safety crisis plan assessment and develop a safety crisis plan. Information regarding this process is described in Directive 4.300. The Safety Crisis Plan is a part of the ISP and also is complete as a standalone document for easy reference by the support team. If behavioral risk situations are frequent, more complex than can be reasonably be addressed through a safety crisis plan, the team should consider professional behavioral services. Behavior support plans can only be developed by licensed professionals, just like some medications can only be prescribed from a physician. These services are considered short-term and must be periodically reviewed. Part of the process of receiving behavioral services is working with the behavioral service provider to fade the special strategies that make up the behavioral support plan. Intent of this section is to evaluate if the person has experienced or is likely to experience situations where they should be afforded due process when there is a proposed limitation and or modification of their rights. Due process, guaranteed opportunity to protest, to be heard, to be informed, and to give consent. The concept of due process is intended to protect people from exploitation of undue restrictions or rights. When an individual is receiving a paid service and the planning team determines that a modification of rights is necessary, the team must ensure that due process has occurred and is documented. It is also the responsibility of the planning team to ensure that the components of due process have occurred when developing supports for persons that help them improve their quality of life. This information should be incorporated into the person's ISP and referred to the Due Process Committee for review. The exploratory questions will focus on the person's choices regarding where they live, who they live with, the ability to access and use areas of their home, opportunity to have privacy in their home, access to make private telephone calls or other forms of private communication, opportunities to access community activities and resources, access to their funds, food, the ability to contact friends and family, etc. The exploratory question will also examine choices the person is making about their life, both currently and plans for the future. Individual rights of persons receiving services from the Division of Developmental Disabilities is a document designed to explain the guaranteed rights of individuals that cannot be limited and those that can be limited for therapeutic purposes. Due process components guide is a tool used to help the support team ensure that due process occurs for the person where there is a need identified for a restrictive intervention. The plan must document who informed the individual and their designated representative, if applicable, of their rights and how the information was communicated to the individual to ensure that they were informed and how they demonstrated understanding of the information. The plan should reflect that due process has occurred by identifying the following components: justification, conditions, teaching or support strategies, monitoring methods, criteria for restoration, review schedule, notice of right to due process, informed consent. While the components are mandatory, the items listed under the components are applicable to the situation and all are not always required. In the next 5 slides, we will discuss the components of due process in more detail. The ISP should reflect every condition under which the restriction is applied. This includes when and where those restrictions are needed. The ISP should include teaching and support strategies that are being taught to help an individual develop skills in order to overcome the need for these restrictive support. The SC will document the positive interventions and support used prior to any modifications to the person-centered service plan per 442 CFR 441.301 C2. Provide evidence that this type of intervention or teaching has worked in the past and information on why this is the method by which the person learns best. There may be situations where an individual has multiple restrictions. If a team decides to prioritize or focus teaching outcomes on only a few restrictions at a time versus all the restrictions at once, the team will need to prioritize. If there are restrictive supports that are required to keep the person or others safe and teaching strategies have not been identified, the supports need to be identified in the ISP along with the efforts that are being explored to support the person in the least restrictive way. For teaching and support strategies, document who is responsible for the training of the strategies. The ISP should include monitoring methods. Monitoring methods include an assurance that interventions and supports will cause no harm to the individual, include a regular collection and review of data to measure the ongoing effectiveness of the modification. Information on data collection methods should include who is documenting, where data is kept, whether it's daily progress notes, outcome data sheets, MARs, etc. What is the frequency of documentation, daily, weekly, monthly? How often is the data reviewed by the team? If the plan is being referred for annual review, there must be documentation noting the progress or lack of progress from the past year of implementation, i.e. summary of monthly reviews, quarterly reviews, behavioral data results, evaluations about the effectiveness of medication or interventions. It will include criteria for restoration and a review schedule. Criteria for restoration. Describe what will it take for the restriction to be lifted, how the individual and team will know when the restrictive support is no longer needed or could be reduced in intensity or frequency. The criterion needs to be in specific, observable, and measurable terms, i.e., if individual has 3 consecutive months of no attempts to elope, chimes will be removed from the exterior doors. Review schedule. Include established time limits for periodic reviews to determine if the modification is still necessary or can be terminated per 42 CFR 441.301 C2. State how often team will submit plan to do process committee for review. Its a minimum is annually. The ISP will include notice of rights to due process. Notice of rights to due process include informed consent of the individual, document that the individual and the guardian are aware of the restrictions, were part of the planning process to develop interventions, know he or she has a right to due process, and have information on what to do and who to contact if he or she does not agree with the restrictions or interventions. Signed authorization page can either be signed by guardian only or can be signed by guardian and individual. Due process training can be accessed on MODD Content Self-Registration Portal. This is the end of Module 5 ISP Training Guide.